Welcome everybody to Tooth and Tail Talks, Ep.6, Fall of the Mole. At least that's the working title. We'll see how that goes. Welcome into the stream, Goris and Eel. Thanks for the sub. Illuminatus. Let me get my co-hosts in here. We've got Satoros and Kipo. So glad you guys could make it. Go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hey, how's it going, Tandor? What's up, Satoros? Happy to be here.
Yeah, same.
So today we're going to interact with the chat just a little bit more here. So I've got you guys pulled up on screen so YouTube knows what's going on. And I will mention some of the interesting points you guys potentially make. So feel free to comment it up in there. But we're going to start with a quick news update on some of the tournaments going on. This is, of course, the patch week. I think it was been out since Wednesday or so. Guys, correct me if I'm wrong on that one.
Sounds about right.
So some of the tournaments have had to make some slight adjustments. So 21 duels still going on here. In a couple of days is the deadline for the first four bosses, and then that's the 21st of July. And then the entire run for each of the players has to be done by the 28th of July. So there was an extension by Gent on that one, so make sure you get your games in. And there are also some rules on his Discord about which patch to use. Some of the original bosses, or the earlier bosses, still need to be using patch 1.7.1 for consistency. And then some of the later bosses on the new, now current patch. So check that up if you are one of the challengers. And those episodes will be hosted as well, so keep an eye out for the casts. Dual Championship is up and running again. There was a bug that was fixed that allows all of our players to play again. So we've got a couple of games before the grand finals that need to be played. The standings here are Satoros and Goris just played against Tatanka and his brother Eldarel. That game has yet to be casted, but it has been played, so be on the lookout for that. We've also got Premium Bomishi versus Meek Nightslayer. That the deadline for that is next week, so hopefully that'll get played soon. And then whoever won the silver match of the Tatankas versus Gortaros is going to be playing versus Tatanka and Cactus. And that'll be it for all of the semifinals, and we'll have our finals bracket lined up. So stay tuned there. We'll get those casted, and we're going to try to set up a live finals for you guys. Welcome into the chat, everybody. So we've also got a new tournament here in Satoris. Do you want to say a word about that? I know you were keeping an eye on that one.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people know I definitely enjoy the 2v2 events a lot. I think 2v2s are just a lot more interesting. There's a lot of different strategies you can go for, and I always like team dynamics and how that plays out. So obviously the dual championship has been fun for sure, but that's kind of winding down now. And so Heartseed, and I believe Premium Bow is also involved, is actually going to be starting up another 2v2 like tournament, but it's going to be more kind of one-off tournaments, just single day events. I think they're calling it the Premium Bot Cup. The last Saturday of every month, I think is what they're aiming for. So the first one's going to be on July 31st. Sadly, I will not be able to make it, but essentially they're just going to use the Pocket Bot to just spin up a new tournament, kind of like they've been doing with the Community Cups. But again, they're planning it once a month and have it be in a 2v2 format. So again, the people who enjoyed playing in the dual championship but still want to get their competitive 2v2 fix can look to sign up there. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Again, sadly, I won't be able to participate. I'll be away during this first one, but I'm definitely looking forward to watching the VODs for it, because I think it'll be cool.
Yeah, definitely check that one out. Again, that's just kind of a one-off thing, so no pressure and no commitment for each one. You can just kind of show up if you want to do it, and definitely looking forward to that. We've also got the King of the Hill continuing. Kipo, you want to talk about that?
It's Sunday at 6 o'clock on my stream, 6 o'clock Eastern time, that is. We have Sensej versus Snake, Leon Tandor. Leon versus Tandor.
That's right.
You. Nice. This guy versus Big Pimp and Tosh and Satoros. You're the other one. Tatanka versus Satoros.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that'll be a fun show. Definitely looking forward to these matches. And if this guy and Tatanka win, they'll be in first place, undefeated, with 4 wins each. So, yeah, looking forward to it. Going to be making some more posters, trying to hype it up more, and it'll be the first week played on the new patch. So, can't wait to see what changes these players make.
Awesome. And that one is, you said again, at 6 o'clock Eastern time this evening. Not that far out. And we've got a highlight from last week's, if you'd like. I'm going to pull it up here.
Sure. So this was in the Tatanka versus Meek series. Now, what I wanted to focus on here was something very specific at this point in time. Oh, wait, did I give you the wrong... That doesn't look right.
This is Shen versus Gore, so let me find... You said Meek versus...
Yeah, it should be 2537. 0002537.
Okay, got it. I'm a couple seconds before that. 2531, Meek Tatanka. All right, it looks like Meek was at 0 and Tatanka at 2. So here you go.
Yeah, so this is the clip. So basically, yeah, just go back like 10 seconds. There's something that very specific that I wanted to highlight. If you just go back like 5-10 seconds.
Okay, so I've got it paused here. There's cams and snakes and a bunch of squirrels facing each other.
If you focus on Tatanka, his commander is going to be switching from offensive to defensive micro, and he's going to be focusing on the snakes. It's the linchpin in his army. His snakes do a ton of damage, especially when they're controlled properly. So you can hit play and you can watch the snakes, and you could watch Tatanka's micro specifically and how perfect it really is.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Do you see that sweep right there? He swept through the squirrels and got like about 1 tag on each squirrel after targeting down the cams, right? Let's try that again.
Yeah, so he targets down the cams. He makes sure that they all have 2 to 3 stacks each. Then they're in a vulnerable position, so he defends with them. He pulls the snakes back so they're safe, and then he goes back into offensive micro and starts tagging up each and every one of the squirrels 1 tag each. And these are some of the things that are separating the really, really, really good players from the good players. When I think of microing in engagements, I think I tend to focus a little more on defensive micro, making sure that I'm pulling my cams back, making sure I'm pulling my snakes back. But you could see Tatanka seamlessly in an instant. I mean, that's a split-second decision, right? Switching from offensive to defensive to offensive micro, all during one engagement, and he's prioritizing the snakes. I just thought this was a really, really cool play, and very, very skillfully executed by Tatanka. And you can see how these top-level guys are actually microing their armies in engagements.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. It's from last week. And if you want to see more stuff like that, cast by Kipo himself, then definitely tune into the King of the Hill.
I have one more tournament update super briefly, just because people have been asking about it. The TnT Championship is supposed to take place after 21 Duels finishes. So after 21 Duels, I'm sure there'll be like a week or 2 of break, but then we will plan the next TnT Championship. As I've said previously, if anyone wants to get involved in the tournament organization aspect of things, just DM me. You could find me, you know where I am, and I'll make sure that you're included and that your voice is heard.
Yeah, that's the biggest, most people do that tournament. That's like the big boy tournament right there. And there are usually different, like 3, give or take, different levels from beginner to premier. So it's definitely open to players of all levels. And that should also be right about after the dual championship wraps up as well. That's the timeline we're looking at.
Yeah, I always look forward to the championship. I mean, like it was said, that's kind of the top level event. You know, the person who wins premier level in the championship is just considered to be the best. That's just how it is. So it's again, if for people who like to play TnT competitively but don't necessarily join that many tournaments, this is the one to consider. And again, there's a beginning level, there's an intermediate level, and there's a premier level, so you'll always be able to find good competition around your level and be able to compete for something. So it's really cool.
Yeah, the winners from last one was Meek got the first place in the Premier, so he is the defending champion for all of Tooth and Tail, basically. And then Tatanka got first place in the Intermediate, so he'll be moving up to Premier. And then Leon got first in Beginner, so he should be up into Intermediate at this point. So, all right. We've also got a bit of a report from the latest Pocket Butt Cups and Community Cups, which is the new kind of Pocket Butt Cup thing that anyone can start at any time. Which, by the way, is what the 2v2 Saturday thing that Satoros was talking about. That's what they're going to be using. Is they're going to use the Community Cup functionality, which is going to be pretty smooth. But what is up with the latest Pocket Butt Cups, Satoros?
Yeah, so these were kind of the last couple Pocket Butt Cups using the old patch. Actually, I think one of them recently, it might have been the European one on Monday, did use the new patch, but regardless, we had some interesting results. Maybe not super shocking, but at least something to talk about. So I'm actually going to start with the Community Cup that happened a couple days earlier. I guess it would have been Friday, on the 8th. That one had quite a few players, and it was actually Melvin Fro beating Meek 3-0 in the finals. But Tatanka was in that one. He actually lost to Melvin Fro 2-1 in the semifinals. So again, it's a rare case where the Tatanka doesn't take first place. But if we fast forward to Monday, where there's the European and American Cups, that story actually continued. Melvin Fro Tatanka did actually meet in the finals of the European PBC, but Melvin Fro won 3-1. So actually a pretty convincing win there for Melvin Fro. I will say there wasn't a whole lot of Wolf Owl on either side. There were just a whole bunch of, kind of more normal decks we're used to seeing, where it's either a lot of tier 2 or some tier 2 and a single tier 3. But yeah, Melvin Fro just played very solid, played big long macro games and just managed to get an edge on Tatanka and push it to get wins. And I will mention Fleur de Lis actually took third place, so congrats to them. Don't usually see him on the podium, but did a good job making it there, so congrats. And then on the American side, Tatanka did 3-0. I think it was you, Tandor, in the finals. And then QQ got third place. But Tandor, I did want to shout you out because you actually beat QQ in the semis, right?
That's what I'm remembering. I think it was a 2-1 victory, so it was kind of close. But yeah, somehow I managed it.
QQ is a premier level player, so definitely props to you for beating him and coming out on top.
Dang, I didn't realize that. I thought he was intermediate.
Nah, he's he's been premier in the past anyways. I know he doesn't play nearly as much as some of the other players, but he's still very strong. He has he's not a meta player. He's not like, Tatanka or Melvin Fro or Erelu or anything like that, where they just play the meta. He definitely likes playing a lot of kind of weirder stuff, usually a lot of defenses, very good with that kind of play, likes ferrets, that kind of thing. You could almost think of kind of similar to Heartsea in that manner, but he's a very good player. So
probably a good thing I didn't know he was that good when I was playing him, or I would have psyched myself out.
Yeah, sometimes that's an advantage, right?
Right.
Don't even think about what your opponent's achievements have been. But
two tournaments ago, he got into the quarterfinals of the Premier Championship, and he's like almost Grandmaster StarCraft 2 player.
Oh wow.
He might have hit Grandmaster before. I'm not sure.
All
Yeah,
right.
he's definitely mid to high master StarCraft, I believe, right now.
Well, I was hoping to take a game off Tatanka, but he's far and above my level, and there might have been some of that psychological element as well. So.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm looking forward to see how the PPCs start going with the new patch. I expect people to start trying some new things.
Awesome. So I do also want to bring up real quick here the ranked game was reset. Ranked play in Tooth and Tail with the new patch was reset, but we have had a couple of days to get some people started. So I want to shout out Tiki Gray, having the most points so far. Tatanka and Meek neck and neck, 345, 344, right behind Tiki, and neck and neck with each other. And then we've got some of the others that have started up here. So just the very beginnings. This is more shout out to the amount of times they've played, because I think it has most to do with how many games people have played in the early stages before we kind of filter everyone through. But definitely props to Tiki there.
Yeah, and shout out to Kippo's alternate name, Squirtle, being fourth.
Oh, that's who that is. I was like, who's this squirrel guy? Okay, well, congrats, Kipo.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I've just been trying to climb, honestly, so see if I can play some more today and throughout the week.
Yeah, well, let me say, now that I look at it, 342 is only a couple of points behind Tatank and Meek, so right up in there. And Leon is Ziggy 12. He's the one I mentioned winning the beginner cup. So there you go, guys. Kipo, do you have anything else to add for the weekly rankings and stuff? I know that Camel is down at the moment.
Nah, nothing, unfortunately. Just yeah, there's been some new players that have been popping on too. There's a individual named Imperial Officer who's really good. I'm surprised they're not on the top 10. Just yesterday they were pretty high up. I guess people have been playing a lot today. And then Kayer, who I'm also not familiar with. But I mean, goes without saying, this has been an incredible time, boys. Am I right? Ladder is just popping off. Every day you can log on and get a game at any time. And if you can't, then you can go into Discord. Really, there hasn't been a better time in Tooth and Tail for quite a while now. So I am so hyped for this game right now.
Yeah, it's been active, and I think that patch and the ladder reset is exactly what the community needed. And we've also, some of us have been waiting for the bug fix, so I gotta second that.
Yeah. I will say Imperial Officer and Care, I think, are both Smurfs, or alternate names. I see Tatanka's mentioning that Care might be Haru. I have no idea about that one. But I also haven't seen Night Slayer on the leaderboards, and I know he likes to Smurf, so I have my suspicions about that.
Well, it's always fun to see people playing around with other names, and some of the older players coming back as well.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, just to echo, like, it was crazy, like, Wednesday and Thursday, like, during peak hours at least, there were so many people that, like, I got, I think, 4 different people, 4 games in a row, which is just unheard of.
Oh yeah, usually you get the same person
even
every
in the
game.
last year. Well, that's the thing, is usually you get the same person every game, or you like switch between 2 different people, because there's not that many people on ladder. But like, yeah, the number of people during peak times at least is actually very impressive.
Yeah, Discord's been hopping as well, so it's a good time to be playing Tooth and Tail. And speaking of, we've been talking about this patch. Let me present the patch notes again. So a lot of people have probably seen this or heard about it, but let's go through it in detail. I've got it pulled up. This is patch 1.8, and this latter season is season 6. I guess titled Precision and Engineering. Or, wait, no. Season 6 and Precision Engineering. Okay, whatever. You see it. So we've got clean ranked leaderboards, some quality of life features and fixes, and then some balance adjustments, which is the most fun, right? So starting with the ladder reset. So I'm going to call out, I think this was Eel that wrote this up, but I'm going to call out who he called out here. the top ladder in no particular order, we had Night Slayer, Kipo, Imari, Tatanka, Ploob, QQ, Trumpet, Melvin Fro, Snake, The Gentleman, Arulu, Mochaccino, Satoros, Tiki Gray, Pile, Big Pimpintosh, R22, Epicosity, James, and Meek. All of them made it past 1,000 points in Season 5. Potentially somebody that Eel missed, but congrats to all of them, and now they've got to reset and start all over, so good luck on their fresh climb. Then let's get into... Let me skip balance changes and come back to this real quick. So we're going to real quick mention the improvements and fixes. The ranked matchmaking has been a little bit funky lately, where it'll get to 14-14 and a lot of people try to reset it there because it feels like it doesn't go past that point. You just kind of stop. But at this point, every 2 minutes, it'll restart automatically, so you can actually just let it go. I believe that's the idea.
Yeah.
So it won't time out.
It was just a weird bug where if you were stuck at 14 for too long, it would basically stop searching. That's a super oversimplification, but that was essentially it, where you would actually have to manually re-queue for it to actually find somebody. But that's gone. That has been fixed. Eel said he tested it where he waited for like 30 minutes or something and still found somebody, and I've waited for like 15 plus minutes and it still worked. So I think that bug is completely resolved now. You can just sit in queue and not do anything, do other things or whatever while you're waiting.
Perfect. Next fix here. This is one that I'm pretty excited about, actually. The hourly leaderboards, when you're in game, previously just wiped over at each top of the hour. So if somebody was still playing like at say 11:57 and it's 12:01, you wouldn't see the previous hour right away. So now they don't wipe completely when the next hour starts. Instead, it's a running total where your leaderboard just stays for an hour from when you got the last points. So that way it's a little bit better reflection of who's actually on, or who actually was most recently on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's basically 2 hours running total instead of 1 hour. Instead of it like on
Instead
the
of
hour
resetting.
just wipes everything, it keeps the last hour. So it's basically 2 hours.
Yeah, so it's a little bit more helpful to see that hourly leaderboard, which is nice.
Yeah.
There's some crash fixes and bug fixes as well, and the multiplayer on Mac is fixed. Looks like PlayStation 4 crossplay is disabled at the moment, but keep an eye on that. That'll come back when they can fix that up. So we mentioned the community events here, and now to the balance changes. So there are a couple of minor tweaks, and some of the ones that they had been thinking about they cut from this patch, like the snake and skunk changes, they went ahead and didn't do, I think, just to push the patch out sooner and to wait and see how this settles down. And I'm always a fan of fewer changes and smaller changes, so if throughout this patch snakes and skunks still need adjusted, then we can always adjust them later. That's just my thoughts. So we've got Commander reveal time is a little bit quicker, 1.6 seconds instead of 2 seconds. Not as quick as it used to be. I believe a previous patch it was at 1.2, so we're kind of splitting the difference, so you don't have to stand for an entire 2 seconds to reveal mines and cams. So you could think of it as a mine or cam nerf in a way, but at any rate. Toads, big change here. They have 1 additional hit point, which I believe translates to 1 additional squirrel shot.
Yep.
And then their speed is nerfed a bit from 1.3 speed on all terrains. They are now exactly 1x speed on all terrains. So I believe that means they're slower on roads than other units, but they're still faster in water.
Correct.
And normal speed elsewhere. So they're unaffected by terrain, but they are just normal speed. And they have had their single target damage cut in half. And I want to clarify, their AoE damage is the same as it was before. That has not been nerfed. It's just the single target damage, which mostly affects when you're fighting with toads in really small numbers or against large targets like a boar or something. Moles. The Warrens have a little bit more hit points, and the loss to the Warren per mole is less, which effectively increases the durability of mole Warrens and effectively reduces the loss of food per mole from 10 to 5. So the inefficiency, the food loss from constantly spawning moles is cut in half, so it's still inefficient but not as bad. And I want to say that the mole warren itself can spawn up to 12 moles before it dies instead of 6, which is a pretty big deal if you want to use moles for a long period of time. I know some players like to use moles in their standing armies. It's not very common, but now you can get away with it for longer. And then if you want to just sell the warren after doing some harassment, it's less inefficient. Clear on that one?
Yep.
Barbed Wire has half the hit points, but it takes half damage when touched. So if you're running through it, it's the same. But if you directly attack it with a melee or AoE attack, or attack it while it's under construction, it will die twice as quickly. So it's a little harder to get up and a little bit more susceptible to moles or cam attacks directly. So a bit of a nerf there. And mines have been it's a bit of a rework here. The mines have, that's what's pictured in this GIF that's running on repeat here. They build in 5 seconds instead of 10, which is a huge buff. But now they have a 2-second sell time where they can be killed. So you can't sell them instantly, which is a bit of a nerf. Their single target damage is dropped from 14 to 8. And I don't know what this revealing that unit, if it is cloaked, can cloak. So you guys know what that is?
Yeah, if a cam gets hit by a mine, it's revealed. That's it.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
Makes sense. So that's a slight adjustment, but the main difference here is that you can put them down faster, but it's not as quick, easy, and foolproof to sell it right away. So that combined with the slightly faster commander timing means you can't just spam them down and hope the commanders don't scout it, because they can scout them, and if they do, you can't sell them instantly. Whereas on the flip side, if you want to push in and do an attack and lay mines to help you retreat, they'll actually be ready for your retreat in 5 seconds instead of 10. That's like the basic idea.
Yeah, mines are complicated, so we can talk more about that later.
Oh yes, and I think later is now. Let's talk just on our first impressions, how this is going to affect. Like, if you guys want to talk about each of these changes and how they're going to affect the balance, and then later we can talk about any like meta shifts you guys are seeing.
Yeah.
You want to start, Satoros?
Sure, I can start. So again, there's a few changes here. I think the biggest changes, or at least the ones with the most obvious impact, are first of all moles. I love moles. That's not a popular opinion, maybe, but I like how moles, add a little bit of, yes, harassment and maybe cheese, but also just pushing power. And now with the way the mole warren and HP loss has been changed, they're a lot less of a liability in a long game. I like where they're at right now. Again, for people who don't know, moles are tier 1, but you can build their warren wherever you want, even not inside your territory, and the first mole builds instantly. So basically, you can get units out of your food way faster than anything else in the game. So that is obviously a big strength, right? And when it used to be that, moles, like, they were just a regular warren, they didn't, like, lose HP over time or anything like that, you could do some really nasty big pushes with just waiting for your opponent to be slightly too greedy, dropping a whole bunch of moles, and then just killing them. But the biggest problem was you could do that push, and if it didn't work, you could just sell off your warrens for full price, and it wasn't much of a risk to do the push. And even worse, you could, if you were being really greedy and your opponent, you saw that your opponent was going to push you and try to punish your greed, you could just drop a whole bunch of moles defensively as just really quick units to have to help hold. And again, with the changes from last patch, it made it so that every time a mole spawns, the warren loses some HP, and so eventually the warren would just die. And what that means is if you try to sell off the warren after you've built some moles, you actually don't get all your food back. And again, if you're playing a really long game and you keep the warren, eventually it's just going to destroy itself. So the whole point is adding some risk or cost to all the advantages moles have. But again, it was a lot more taxing last patch. I think this patch is a much better balance. And I've been doing some testing with it myself, but I think it's going to allow for, again, a little more dynamic gameplay, and I'm really looking forward to how that's gonna impact the game.
Yeah, I think moles are in a good spot. I mean, we're really not going to be able to draw any kind of conclusions, at least for a few weeks. Um, but what happened with moles? That was a good summary. I mean, 2 patches ago, in almost every high-level tournament game, both players picked moles. Last patch, you never saw them. No one ever picked moles in these high-end tournament games, right? So hopefully now we're in a sweet middle ground. And yeah, I want to say that they're back. Moles are back, baby, but I don't know 100% yet because I still need to do some more testing myself. But they definitely feel a lot better to use. There's less of a risk that there's less of a need to get damage done whenever you put a mole warren down.
But it's still not free, so we shouldn't be returning completely anyway to the mole dominance days. But because they got hit so hard with the Nerf hammer, because it was just crushing everything, I think the Nerf hammer has just been lifted a bit, and I expect we'll see moles a lot on ladder because everyone wants to see how they're going to work. But when that settles down, when the dust settles, are moles going to still be not really used, or are they going to be back a lot, or are they going to be niche? Don't know.
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't seen that many moles on ladder. I think I've still been one of the few people using them. I'm sure other people have been, but I think it's going to take people time to readjust the moles. But I do think they'll come back.
So, Satoris, if you want to move on to pick your next one, I like the way this format is working, where we kind of go one at a time.
Yeah. So, I think I'm going to leave Commander Reveal and Mines last because it's by far the most complicated in my mind. So I'll just talk about Toads real fast. Toads technically got buffs and nerfs. HP buff, but speed nerf and damage nerf. Basically, the way I see it is Toads were niche before last patch, and then last patch they were just very core units if you wanted them. And now I think they're going to go back to being niche. And essentially the reason why is, yes, HP buff is great, but I think the HP plus the speed change almost kind of cancels out, where the Toads are essentially melee where they have to get to the opposing unit to blow up. So if you're talking about, squirrel armies and the Toads, want to get to the squirrels, then they still have to run up to the squirrels and then it explodes. Obviously, if they have 9 HP instead of 8, they can take one more shot, but they're at 1 times speed instead of 1.3, so it takes them longer to get there, so it's kind of a wash. And then there's a lot of other things, whereas, if you're having skunks involved or other units, then the 9 HP versus 8 isn't really that big of a difference. And again, it's not necessarily straightforward, but I think it's, again, kind of a wash. But really the biggest thing also is that just the damage nerve is, it doesn't necessarily affect against tier 1 as much, because we're only talking about the single target damage that was affected, but the single target damage was cut in half. So now, just running a whole bunch of Toads into an army with tier 1 and tier 2 is way less effective. It used to be that if you had enough Toads, you could just focus fire their skunks or snakes or whatever, and you would both kill a bunch of tier 1 and do very good damage to their tier 2. It's just not the case anymore.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but also just running a bunch of Toads into a mill would be less effective. You need more Toads to kill the mill now as well, right?
Technically, yes.
Well,
they do still have, a lot of their damage still comes from the building crit.
Yeah, sure, but
they're like that.
But I'd be curious to have somebody run the numbers and see how many Toads does it take to kill a mill now, and it might be a noticeable difference.
Yeah, it's definitely a difference. So, and actually, also another thing, Toads against cams, that dynamic has changed now that they have less single target damage. So, anyways, long story short, I think Toads definitely got a nerf, even if it might look like they had some pluses and some minuses. And I really dislike, I say dislike just because I found it very helpful, that if we're even talking outside of combat, just the movement speed nerf, it really hurts because I loved using toads as kind of like splitting the toads from the army a little bit, especially if your opponent's running lizards and trying to like hit you from multiple angles. You can just kind of leave your toads at the back of your base, you know, from a second angle, and they would have the speed to get back to your main army quicker. Or even you could, again, use toads a little easier to like corner your opponent's lizards. And again, losing that speed really hurts, and not just in fights. So
Well,
I
correct me
don't
if
know.
I'm wrong, Kipo, but I feel like the speed of toads is like core to how they were used in the last patch. The amount of micro you could do with them, it seems like the speed was kind of a big deal because they could outrun any normal speed units except on roads and definitely in the water. So it seems like the hit point buff was only to slightly negate the loss of speed in certain situations. But I don't know. It seems like a lot of their micro potential has been potentially lost there, except in as a defense. But what do you think, Kipo?
I I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that I think that the Toad was over nerfed, and I don't like the Toad. I don't use Toad. I don't think about Toad. I don't like to use Toad. I don't try to use Toad. But using the Toads in this patch and having someone else use the Toads against me, um, this is to me this is the most dramatic shift in the meta is going to be the nerf to Toads. I don't think they're viable anymore. I think they've been over nerfed, and I think the story is the damage. I mean,
So
I was
do you think
it's it.
if they kept the slowing the speed down and the hit point buff, the speed nerf and the hit point buff, but just didn't nerf the damage in the way that it would be fine?
Yeah, I think Toads would still be pretty solid if they had just slowed them down a little bit, or you know, you could include or not include the HP. That's fine. But the story is just the damage. They do so much less damage, and when you watch Toads chew through an army, imagine like a grid of like a diamond of units. You know, they have to kill the first unit in order for the AoE to affect the units, you know, in the middle line. It's just they chew through armies so much quicker because they're taking down and killing units so much slower. So instead of like, you know, one or two toad hits to kill a unit, now you need like three or four, right? So the AoE damage isn't going to be that much spread out because you have so many toads that are just hitting one target to just try and kill that one guy. Um, I don't think I'll be using toads in any of my decks. I tried them out in the beginning and I stopped because I didn't think they were effective. Um, but I mean, we'll have to see. I mean, I didn't like Toad patch, Toad meta. So I'm definitely really enjoying the game right now that I don't see them anymore. My little lizards can run all over crazy. Um, but yeah, that's my take on it. I know it's a hot take, but I think that the Toad was over nerfed, and I think that they're in the lowest tier probably right now.
Yeah, I would. I would in general agree. Again, I haven't done any serious testing with it, but I would agree. I think they're still good against lizards, but again, that's basically it. They're just very niche now. And to your point about how the armies kind of like spread out naturally, and then how toads work, it's actually more important to target fire with the toads to make sure they actually like get to a good AOE position instead of just because again, less of their damage is single target, so you really need the AOE to be effective.
Yeah, I actually was interested to keep with the way you were kind of analyzing that. Is generally speaking, in the previous patch, toads would hit the front of the army, a couple of them would go off and kill the front of the army, and the rest of them would get into the middle and do all the AoE. Whereas now, you'll lose quite a few more along the front end before you actually get to the middle. Does that is it possible that you can use micro target firing to get them in anyway? Like, yes, they are slower, they've got a little bit of a hit point, but can you uh, can you use micro, like targeting something in the middle of the army, so that you don't lose many toads on the very front and actually get some of the effectiveness back, as long as you don't have other units you need to be microing? Do you think that's something that we might be seeing?
Yeah, well, that's what Satoros mentioned, and I completely agree. That's really what you have to do. I mean, it's definitely a challenge, microing, especially if you're trying to go for a glob of tier one, to try to micro your way like past the first squirrel or what have you. I'd have to test it out. Um, but it's definitely going to be critical, I think, to anyone who wants to continue to use toads on this patch.
All right. So next we've got in the list there to go back around to where did my there it is. So left Satoros, we've got the commander stuff, the mines, and the barbed wire.
Oh yeah, real quick on barbed wire. I mean, this is a very simple change I think to analyze. It just makes it more of a risk to get up in the first place, and it makes their counters more hard counters. It's as simple as that. I don't think it's the end of the world for barbed wire. I don't think it's actually that big of a change, but I do like that it's a little bit more of an investment to get it up. You really have to have an army presence, or your opponent has to be nowhere near it for you to get wire up safely. Because I mean, 7 HP is nothing. Like you have four squirrels will one shot wire now. Like
So
yeah,
basically, the triple tier 3 thing where people hide behind wire should be a bit weaker, or at least it's a little harder to get up because you got to make sure that you got to be smarter about when you get the wire up to make it work.
Yeah, you have to be a lot more careful with the wire. Obviously you can still do it. Again, a lot of times people don't have their armies in the middle of the map, so like there's still going to be plenty of times where you can get it up for free. But you just have to be more aware of it, and it's a lot harder to, again, the whole panic. Oh crap, my opponent's going to punish my greed. Let me just throw down a whole bunch of barbed wire. Like that's way riskier now.
Yeah.
Because actually, I've seen people in the past, like when they're super desperate, they'll just build a bunch of barbed wire right in front of the enemy army, essentially, and just use that to tank for their army. Yeah, but that's obviously not going to work anymore. But like having half as much HP is just a big problem. But it'll still do what it needs to do.
I'm actually really interested to see the other impact of that once it's up, the direct counters, and we're talking moles and cams mostly. I'm actually really interested to see whether people run moles or cams more or pull them out more quickly when they see wire, since they're going to be so much stronger of a counter against wire. Like if you've got moles in your deck now and you see wire, it seems like it'd be that much easier to just pop down a mole wire and chew through it real quick.
Yeah,
which seems interesting.
It's funny because I mean, I can talk about this in a little bit, but I think because of the way the meta is going to shift with toads being nerfed and moles being buffed, I think barbed wires, I don't know, it's going to be in a weird spot because yes, lizards are going to be more popular, but moles and cams are also going to be more popular. So it's going to be a weird spot for wire.
Yeah, I felt like I've already seen a rise in the chameleon since the patch started. Since we're not seeing toads every game, I feel like I've been seeing a lot more chameleons.
Yeah.
And they just chew through wire like it's nothing. So you're right, Tandor. That's the point that I was going to make. The triple tier 3 build, where the linchpin was really the barbed wire, is definitely going to be less effective in this meta game, I think. Or at least that variation of it that uses barbed wire.
You mentioned seeing cams more, and I wonder, because I've heard a bit of a fight actually on whether or not cams are effective against lizards, and if so, in what situations. And with toads not being around to counter lizards as much, because that's about the only thing that they're good for anymore at the moment, is what we're thinking. But do you think cams are also used more just because people want to be able to use something against lizards besides lizards of their own?
So
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna jump in here because I definitely have thoughts about it. I've traditionally struggled against lizards, so I've always thought about what are the ways to deal with lizards. So toads are a hard counter to lizards. If you have 12 toads and 12 lizards, it's not going to be pretty. But that's not necessarily the case with a lot of other unit matchups. So cams against lizards, yes, cams will win, but I don't think that they're not quite as dominant against lizards, at least in my experience, as something like toads. But again, because toads are not around as much, there's not going to be a lot of people naturally running that to stop lizards. So people are going to look for other better ways to at least help against lizards. And I think cams are kind of a natural pick. There's other things you could do, obviously, but like for myself, cams are definitely a nice way if you have a particularly bad map or you just need some other way to be a little stronger against lizards, I think cams are a good choice. So I definitely think cams are going to be used more because we're going to see more lizards.
Yeah, I feel like there's been a debate as to like, if you're countering lizards, do you pick skunk or do you pick chameleon? And I know there's all sorts of different opinions on this, and I believe that Tiki Gray, who's now our number one player on ladder, doesn't think that chameleons are can really hard counter lizards. But I tend to disagree. I think chameleons are a really good pick if your opponent is running lizards. It just depends on the numbers. It really does. Like once he's up to like 15 lizards, you got to have 4 chameleons. You know, like you can't really just have 2. They'll just get chewed up so quickly. But once you get like up to 4, like I think it could be really good. So yeah, I like chameleons. I like where they are right now. And Tatank is in the chat saying Squizzard Cam new meta, and he's got a really good point there. I've been seeing it in a lot, and I've experimented with it as well. And it's just chameleons and lizards probably are the highest damage dealing units, like in tier 1 and tier 2, right? Like they just deal so much damage so quickly that they seem to be able to roll over everything, right? Snake's useless against it, right? Skunk is not really good against it because the lizards and the chameleons are changing their positions and they're moving so quickly that they're not really sitting in the skunk gas for too long, right? And then Falcon is obviously useless against lizard. So I've seen it a lot. Tatanka brought it up in chat. I know a bunch of other players have been experimenting with it as well. But I agree that Squizzard Chameleon is extremely strong right now for like your super early game.
Yeah.
I like how you mentioned that Tiki there, and that there is definitely a bit of a debate on whether or not cams are that good against lizards. And it seems like the three of us are pretty much in agreement about yes, they are. But it's at least a lot more relevant this patch because, again, toads are a little bit pushed to the side. So we're going to find out one way or the other, and I think we should, in the next couple of months, be solving that debate because it's just going to get hashed out a lot more. So I look forward to that.
Yeah, just real quick. I don't think cams are a hard counter. I think they're a soft counter. I think they work favorably against lizards, but I don't think it's just an auto win like to the same degree toads were. So I also think chameleons are just good in a lot of situations, especially early and mid game. So I think it is a logical pick for especially a tier 2 deck anyways. Like, you know, throwing, even if they don't have lizards, just throwing in a couple cams with your, you know, skunk, snake, Falcon kind of tier 2 build is still very effective. So I think it's because cams are fairly well rounded in the early to mid game is why they're, you know, going to be good right now.
I have a couple of caveats to throw at you guys. One is that snakes have not been nerfed, so I think snakes still counter cams pretty hard. Snakes don't counter lizards, and I know you mentioned the Squizzard cam is good against snakes because of the lizard side, I think, but if you don't have the lizards with them, snakes still should be pretty strong against cams. So I think snakes aren't going to go away, especially if cams are coming in hot. The other two things I want to mention is the slight buff to commander scouting has got to be at least a tiny bit helpful against cams, and the fact that mines technically reveal cams in like the 1 or 2 times out of 100 when that makes a difference, it's technically helping against cams. So it's not like, you know, cams were almost directly not affected by the patch, but if anything, they got the tiniest bit of a nerf from the commander timings and the mine stuff. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I'm glad you transitioned us. So so commander reveal and mine. So yeah, this is the change I am the least certain of. Well, I mean, first of all, commander reveal time, again, that's just a straight up nerf to anything that cloaks. It'll be a little easier if somebody chameleon harasses you to be able to catch the chameleons because you can reveal a little faster, so that's kind of cool. But obviously against mines, it just means it's going to be faster to mine sweep. So if you're trying to get from point A to point B with point B being your opponent's base, it'll be a little faster to do the more slow and methodical safety sweep of the area for mines, which I I don't know. I've played when mines were incredibly strong, and it's not necessarily fun, at least in my mind. So I can definitely understand that change. But if we change to mines themselves for a second, so again, just to sum up the changes, they build twice as fast, and they do less damage, and it takes time to sell them. Those are kind of the three big ones. So first of all, it's much easier to get mines down without your opponent knowing for a fact where they are. So that is obviously a huge buff, right? If the biggest, the place where that's the biggest advantage is your opponent doesn't even know if you have mines in your deck or not. That's kind of the first big win of having mines, right? Is when your opponent doesn't expect them and plays as if you don't have them. That could be a big win. But even when your opponent knows that you brought mines, it's going to be, again, it's so much harder. Even if they're doing a somewhat regular scout cycle, they're just not going to naturally see you building mines as much anymore, which means you can be a little more liberal with how you place them down and when. So that's obviously a huge buff in my mind. But the other two things, first of all, the damage nerf. The damage nerf of, I think it's from like 14 damage to 8 single target.
That's right.
If I'm correct. So that, again, that doesn't affect against tier 1 at all, because actually, I'd take that back. Technically, moles have 12 HP, so it wouldn't one-shot a mole, but a one-shot's basically all the tier 1, right? So it doesn't affect that as much, but if your opponent is doing an old strat, which is using tier 2 to basically sweep through mines, that's going to be way more effective now. And that combined with the fact that if you try to sell mines, they actually get revealed and are still killable for 2 seconds, means if you're trying to, like, if the opponent is mine sweeping you with their army, you can't just say, oh crap, he's gonna kill all my mines for free and then sell them all. They're just gonna die anyways. So long story short, with all of those changes, the way I have been viewing mines, and again, Kipo, you can agree or disagree, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, is I think mines are so much stronger as utility, but are a lot less good as a basically defense to stop enemy armies from attacking you, in quite the same way of the old, an old style of I'll just throw down 10 mines and he just can't attack me. Like, I don't think that's as good. So I definitely loved it for the vision, and again, just the intel that just the obviously just almost free getting them down in the first place. I've definitely loved using that aspect of it, but again, less so the defense.
Yeah, I still haven't. I don't have strong feelings on mines like I have for toads, where I'm like, this is a definitive nerf. I am still trying to gauge how I feel about mines. On paper, I think it's a nerf. And in practice, at least playing against them has been much easier. Because, like you said, once that first mine goes off, great. I lost a tier 1 for 20 food, you lost a mine for 20 food. But the thing is, like, if you play a lot with mines, then you know exactly the critical points on the map where they need to be placed. And then when you play against players that are using mines, you can generally guess where they're going to be. And with the commander reveal time being as it is, it's just that much faster to reveal. And when the opponent tries to sell it, just think about last patch. How many times you went to reveal a mine and kill it, and the other commander came over and sold it instantly so that you didn't get the kill? That used to happen all the time. And there's been so many times in this past week where I've revealed a mine and I've gone to kill it with a squirrel. The other commander goes to sell it, but it takes like 5 seconds or whatever. So my squirrel ends up killing it. So they're easier to find, they're easier to kill, they do less damage. I don't see too many benefits. I mean, if you were really effective at placing mines, you could generally get away with them last patch. So now it's easier, which is great. but I'm scared that the nerf will be a little too much, and they'll go the way of the toad, and there'll be a niche unit that you have with a pocket deck.
I've got to say that I, I'm viewing the mine nerf in the same way that I view the toad nerf. There is technically a buff in there, and there are several nerfs in there for both units. But the way that Kipo said toads might be a little over nerfed, I think the mine might be a little over nerfed. And I know that Eel is going for a different role for the mines, not just less good at its original role. He's trying to give them a different utility, which Satoros is saying the utility of them might be slightly stronger because it's so helpful to get them down quicker, like scouting. Your opponent might never explode on the mine, and that might not be the mine's point. It might literally just be for information. But I think it is still a little bit over nerfed, and it would need another buff somewhere else, like a slight price cut maybe, so that it can do its other role, or maybe unnerfed a little bit, like the cell timer still there, and the 5 seconds to place instead of 10 seconds still there, because the cell timer is a big deal. You're right. Every time you play against mines, people are selling them in front of you. That's a huge deal. And the commander reveal timing is a nerf on mines as well, even more than it is for cams. I don't think the damage cut was. I think that was where it's a little bit too much. Kind of like with toads, where the single target damage nerf might be unnecessary. So that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, you definitely might be right about that. Again, my uses have been like I can just plop it down next to a mill that I expect them to take, and I can see exactly when they take it. And then again, just like monitoring army movements for the most part. But to your point, like if you're trying to like put mines at certain points of the path, once they've detonated it once, they're going to expect another mine there. So it does make it slightly more difficult then.
I guess to put it slightly differently, if you want mines to be help in a fight, like he stated at one point, he wants them to be able to be used when you go for an attack to put them down so that you can retreat over them. They don't do enough damage to make it worth it, it seems like, because like they can still, if you're being chased by a bunch of lizards or something, the AoE is still definitely worth it there. But it's situational enough, even in that situation, even in that spot that you can find yourself, that it might not even be worth having in your deck. But so if you want them to do that, keep the cell timer, because that like adds a layer of strategy where you have to think about whether it's worth it, because you can't sell it without it getting killed later. But maybe bring the damage back to where it was, or somewhere in between. Or if you'd rather that just not be as good and use it more as a scouting thing, then maybe make it a little bit cheaper, like 15 instead of 20. What do wines cost? 20?
Yeah, they're 20.
Yeah, so maybe cutting the cost to like 15 or something, if you want to keep the damage down, might kind of lean into the scouting aspect of the utility, or bringing the damage back might kind of make them back into the mines they used to be, but smarter. So I don't know. I could see it going a couple different ways, but I definitely think that they are a little bit over-nerfed.
Yeah, I think the one situation you brought up where the less time to build kind of is more important than any of the other aspects are when you're using them offensively, where you're like actually doing a push with them. Because the idea is you would be able to defend them. So it doesn't matter if it takes time to sell them. It doesn't matter if their opponent commander can reveal them. Your army's there, so you can defend them and you can just retreat over them. We'll see if that is going to actually be effective or not, because the damage hit might be too much. Again, against lizards, they're just as good, because the 8 damage is still enough to one-shot a lizard. But again, if they're coming at you with tier 2, especially like chameleons or something, although I guess mine's too slow. So I don't know. We'll see. It might end up just being a straight nerf, and we might see mines basically never, but who knows? Maybe somebody crazy enough will make the offensive mines work.
Yeah, and remember, ferret mine is a thing it's never been meta, at least not recently. Has it ever been meta, ferret mine?
Not to my knowledge. Never.
Yeah.
Not
a build.
Not. I don't think so.
Okay, so it's not, at least very recently, been in the main meta. But it's always kind of been something that people use as a pocket build, or just kind of accept that it's less efficient and use it anyway because it's fun. I think that's still fine. Because in the last patch with the 10-second mine build, you kind of had to set up the ferret mine You had to move out into the middle of the map, put some mines down, then push, which gave the defenders some time to see what was coming and maybe push back before the mines were up. Now you can actually just go, and there's less setup time for the mines to do the ferret mine push. That might be slightly stronger now, maybe, because most of the disadvantages of the mine are, like you were saying, Sataros, are less relevant for that aggressive play. So we might see some ferret mine experimenting that could work out, which is cool. I don't think it'll be meta, but I think it'll be as decent as it always has been.
Definitely looking forward to it.
So I think we've covered just about all of the direct changes, and quick honorable mentions again to snakes and skunks. They were going to get a bit of a nerf and a bit of a change. They haven't yet, but I think Eel is still thinking about it. I know he wants to nerf snakes somehow, specifically the days aspect. It seems like right now... Well, okay, let me approach it this way. Let me ask you guys, are there units that have not been directly modified that have some kind of indirect buff or nerf besides the lizard? We already talked lizards have gotten an indirect buff, so to speak. They're stronger because their counters have been weakened. Are there other units, tier 3, whatever, that you think will be a lot stronger or weaker because of something indirect?
Well, chameleons, I think we also discussed earlier.
Yeah.
Because they're melee units, they generally will collide with the toads, along with whatever other tier 1 lizards, etc., happen to be in the vicinity. So I think with the toad nerf, chameleons might be seen a little more and used a little more, and they might be a bit stronger, even with the reveal. The commander reveal is really only going to be for retreating chameleons, and if you're clever, you can sort of juke and jive and hopefully get your chameleons out without them being revealed.
Yeah, so as far as other units besides lizards and cams, I mean, technically, if people are going squizzards every game and delaying their tier 2, snakes aren't going to be quite as good in the early game. But I think that's mostly a minor thing. It just means it will be later in the game when we see snakes. But again, kind of a minor thing. I don't know if this means also that owls are actually slightly better in this metagame than they were, which is a little scary to think of. But I mean, obviously, mice usually line up pretty well against lizards, and I wouldn't exactly say toads countered owls, but they certainly cleared up mice quickly. Again, if we see a lot more like tier 1 heavy games, because again, squizzard's just kind of a little better than the way it was, then owls might actually be slightly better just because of that. But I don't know, that might be a bit of a stretch.
I see it. I see the logic there, because if you had toads, then it wasn't really a good situation against an owl player if you're looking for like a long game. But toads always gave you that, you know what, I'm going to take one engagement and push through and just win the game right here. You always had that option with toads against owls. And now that's kind of sort of going to be off the table.
And in addition to that, and again, Kippo, you would know better than me because you're a better Squizzard player than I am, but like when you're going squirrel toad, I mean, you would get like a few toads and then, a normal amount of squirrels. But with like Squizzard, you can play with like 12 squirrels and 12 lizards into the mid game easily, right? You just get really large numbers of tier 1.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing a lot of right now. A lot of players in the ladder are using this exact style where they're going really heavy squirrel lizard, like 12 and 12. And if you have an open engagement or like an engagement on an open field, or just the fight happens to be in the open, then that player's just going to dominate.
I want to throw out real quick there with the discussion of what players are doing right now. And this is a view of RTSs in general that I have. I think when you have changes, new games, new patches, adjustments or whatever, the meta's first response is to be very early game focused and aggressive, because people haven't figured out the timings of how to survive and get further on, and this is just general for all RTSs. So take StarCraft, for example. In the early history, you would not expand very much. Certainly not right away. Fast expand builds just died because people didn't know how to get them up safely. But as time has gone on, you can get more and I think this is true for StarCraft 2 as well. But I know for StarCraft 1. As time goes on, people figure out more and more ways of surviving, and now fast expands are kind of standard in a lot of the matchups, except ZVZ in Brood War, because it's not a matchup. But I think some of that heavy squizzard in the meta right now might be some of that, where people just don't know how to handle it yet without toads, but they will figure it out at some point. Does that make any sense?
I mean, so TnT is not quite like other RTS games where builds are not as set in stone. They're a lot more fluid because all the maps are random.
Oh, sure.
And obviously you don't know your opponent's deck for sure. So that makes it, I mean, that makes it even harder to figure out like how you're going to defend against your opponent's aggression. But it kind of goes the other way where you can't like be guaranteed to have a good map for your strategic attack. But I would agree in general that I think as the patch goes on, people are used to seeing what the meta compositions are, and they're used to knowing ways of dealing with the aggressive tendencies, right? So I think over time we'll see it shift to, slightly more mid to late game focus.
Yeah, I think so as well, definitely.
Okay, here's a thought. So I'm scrolling through the unit discussion because I'm curious what people are saying out there. And there's a lot of talks right now about EL testing some new units and some new stuff. I just want to real quick mention, he is still thinking of nerfing snakes, getting rid of the days. And he is considering nerfing mice or owls. So that kind of ties into how you're saying owls could be pretty strong right now. But what I really want to mention is right before that, Tiki was saying that mines, one of the reasons they're not as good is it takes 3 of them to kill a fox now. I think that's what he was saying.
Yeah, I saw that.
It takes more mines to surprise kill a fox. Does that, and he was saying that's why mines are not as good, but let me take the other half of that. Do you think foxes are a little better in this patch because there's one less strong counter?
No.
No,
I don't think so.
I unfortunately have to agree, and it's just because of the prevalence of owl. I mean, bringing up unit discussion, a lot of people were discussing owls and specifically wolf owl. Tiki has said it's the only build without a counter in the game. He's gone on record saying that, and other people have been chiming in as well, saying that it's essentially the strongest late game composition you could have. So it's definitely been a focal point in the community this past week, and even before that as well. So because of that, it's a real risk trying to take a fox.
What about moles then? If we have a comment in the chat from a bit earlier, Tatanka saying his impression is that all tier 3 are worse because you can punish with moles. Is moles now a response to wolf owl? Maybe.
Could be. I mean, the old heirloom mole bust where you get 18 moles and you have a tier 2 death ball and you charge in and try to sweep through the opponent's space and win. I'm not sure. What do you think, Satoros? Do you think we're going to see that kind of style play this patch if it becomes tier 3 centric?
So moles are worse as the game goes on, in my experience. Early on, when there's no tier 2, they're fantastic because of how fast they come out and the fact you can build them anywhere. Once tier 2 come out, like especially skunks and that kind of thing, they kind of fall off a little bit. You're still getting more units, faster and where you need them, but they're just, because they're melee and slow, it means they're just not quite as effective. But they're still very good at threatening to just kill your opponent's base. So it can take a case where you already have an army advantage, but you just need to kill them quickly before they get their tech up. Moles certainly help you do that. I mean, they eat through buildings like nobody's business. So I do think it helps. I think it helps. Is it enough? Is it gonna be a hard counter to Wolf Owl? I don't know. We'll wait another couple of weeks and see what happens. But I honestly do think it is going to be a little easier to punish tech. in general, especially tier 3. But we'll see about that.
So, what about Falcons? We haven't talked about them much. Are they? Uh, they still can hit cams, and cams can't hit up. But I'm struggling to think of any other direct connections between Falcons and some of the buffed and nerfed units. Are they a little bit better? Or are they about the same?
I don't know. Maybe I'd say they're about the same. I mean, if you have more lizards running around the map, you have to be really careful as the Falcon player when you're transporting your Falcons on the map, and when you select where to have an engagement. Because if there's a lot of lizards and you're in the open and the opponent gets a flank, they could have less army supply and they could still take that fight if you have Falcons and your opponent has lizards, right? So I don't know. Like, Falcons are becoming less and less prevalent in the meta, and I don't think that they're really super necessary. But in terms of the patch and the changes, it's hard to say. I don't think they really had much movement.
Yeah, again, we can talk about all the units individually, but this might be a good time to just move on to the tier list and see like how we think things might have changed.
Yep, good idea. A lot of the rest of the unit discussion was about future patch stuff, and we can dedicate a different episode of TnTTalks to that if we want to do that. So let's look now at the tier list. I have it pulled up here. This is where we left it last time. And, Kipo, I don't know if you saw...
the lizards moved to first place. Yeah, I saw.
Yes, and Tatanka was about to move cams back up, I believe. And he decided against it because he wanted to make a different move for his choice there. But that would have been an interesting back and forth, because I know you were the one that moved them down to begin with. But now we're looking at it, and there's a couple kind of obvious ones that we've already been talking about because we are on a new patch, and I'm still going to limit it to one switch per person, so it'll take us a couple weeks to really sink in. But what are we thinking here? Looking at this, I'll make the move last since it's my show. But but you guys, what are you guys thinking?
I mean, the one that's just glaringly obvious is Toad, right? That there's no way that could remain an S. Whether it goes to B or C is hard to say. I still think it's a tad too early, but I don't know. Looking at the units in C, I think it could fit okay there. Like, I think a wolf is better than Toad. I think Pigeon's better than Toad. I think pretty much most of the stuff in A and B is better than Toad. So, yeah, like Ferret, Fox, Chameleon, Toad. Yeah, it seems appropriate to put in C. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, I don't know. I think of C tier as mostly niche stuff. That you need a very specific. Either you need a very specific strategy to argue running them, or you know your opponent and you expect something very specific. And I think that's where Toads are going to be. If you know your opponent's going to go heavy lizards, like that's when Toads are going to shine. So, but besides that, there's better options generally. So I think for now we'll put them in C. Maybe they'll redeem themselves, but we'll see.
Okay, so we have Toad's definitely going down. And I'm thinking Mole's definitely got to go up from D. We might not have a D tier unit, which is great. I'll leave the empty D tier in case something falls. But that's definitely something I think makes a lot of sense. Anything else? Because that's 2 changes potentially.
Well, so I'll just go ahead, because you said you want the last pick, so I'll let you get the last pick. For moles, right now I would probably put them in B tier. Maybe they should be in C, and maybe that's my bias speaking through. But I think they're powerful enough that they deserve to be respected and should be in B tier. Just again, their strength to literally steal games, even against some of the best players, if you're good with your timing. I mean, the fact that I can win against Tatanka with moles just speaks to how strong they are. So I think putting them in B tier makes a lot of sense. Like again, maybe not the best comparison, but like Wolf. Wolf is good in very specific situations, but when it's good, it's incredibly good. And I kind of see moles the same way. Is if your opponent doesn't expect them, and even sometimes when they expect them, they can just be very hard to deal with. So it just adds a whole new angle of attack to your arsenal.
Real quick before we make any decisions down, I want to shout out Shenshei in the chat here. He's saying that pigeons, we should talk about them real quick. Toads used to counter pigeons because of the instant literal burst damage. But if toads are dropping out of meta, then pigeons have an indirect buff. But on the other hand, with mines and barbed wire being dropped down a peg, pigeons would be less useful as a soft counter to them. So what do you think about the place of pigeons potentially? I'll say real quick, I kind of think they're still decent, but go ahead.
I could see how they can be stronger because of the toad DPS dropping. And I personally love pigeons. I think that they're a fantastic unit, especially if your opponent doesn't have lizards. If your opponent just has squirrels and you have squirrel, pigeon, skunk, snake, you could pretty much one base push and like almost win. You could win tons of games like that. I personally really like pigeon. I've been using them a ton in all of my ladder games. Do I think they should go to A and be on the same level as the owl? That I'm not as certain about. I think that they're decent in B. Maybe they're like a B plus. That's what I'll go with.
I completely agree. I think pigeons are very good, especially in certain compositions. I think toads being worse does make them slightly better, but they're still obviously not good with a bunch of squizzards running around. So I think they're perfectly good in B tier.
I think pigeons have always been good on paper against the triple tier 3 comp, unless the triple tier 3 comes out and you need every deck slot you've got to be active in fighting it. But because triple tier 3, the one I'm thinking of uses squirrels, skunks, and wire, and pigeons fine against all of those. So on paper, it's good to do a timing push against that. But if triple tier 3 is not happening as much, and people are running around with lizards constantly now because toads aren't a thing, so lizards are, to oversimplify it, pigeons would be less of a big deal then, because lizards are kind of a counter to pigeons in the early game. So I think I've got to agree, at the end of the day, they seem like they still belong in B tier. So, Kipo, it sounds like you were thinking about where to put the toads. Do you want to make your choice official?
Yes, I believe I put them in C as in cat.
All right.
Was that, and you agree with that, right, Sat?
Yeah, I think that's fine for now.
Makes sense to me. And as Statanka said earlier, S to C, how the mighty have fallen. Oh boy. Toads are, I don't know, where's Toad Road Gang when you need him?
Bad. That's where we are.
And Satoros, you're talking about moles?
Yeah, I think moving moles from D to B tier, I think is where I would put them. Again, not great in all facets of the game, but very powerful when they are good. And I think the risks and costs of using them now are very much worth their benefit. So I would put them in B tier.
Yeah, look at this. Moles are above toads.
I think that's appropriate. I would be more inclined to use mole than I would toad. I honestly just don't think I'll be using toad in this patch, like almost ever.
So let me open up to the chat again here. I'm going to wait 5 minutes or so before I make my final decision. We'll keep talking, but let me see what you guys think. We could even put it up to a vote if I see a lot of the same ones. What do you want to move, guys? In the chat, let's see. In the meantime, skunks are good. Maybe skunks could drop. Squirrels and lizards, absolutely S tier. No doubt about that. Snakes, I'm keeping them in S tier for sure. Owls, A. A lot of people say owls are needing a nerf, but I don't see them all the time, so I can't justify putting them in S tier because they have yet to actually dominate all of the meta. Wolf Owl is good, but that's a specific thing. That's not like all the time. So Wire I could see dropping from A tier. Definitely don't think Wire is A tier. right now, so actually I'm kind of leaning towards that, but let's see. Heartseed saying Toad is bad, but not that bad. Well, I think we'll have to wait and prove it here. Unless we get another guest on next week that just moves him back up again. So, Boars and Falcons, good. A tier. Let's see.
Million up, says Tatanka. I completely agree.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it looks like Cams and Wire could both potentially be in the wrong place. What else?
If I get a vote for this last pick, I would definitely move Chameleons up. Again, I think this tier list reflects the metagame to some extent, and again, because of the patch change, favoring lizards, I think Chameleons are going to be better positioned. So
yeah, definitely. So we've got 2 in the chat here saying Cam should go up. We've got saying Falcon might be a little too high. What else, guys? I know we've got a couple more people in here.
I think Falcon's not too bueno these days, just because of how we've unlocked the power of Snake.
Yeah, I've seen some interesting examples of Snakes actually just straight up beating Falcons in a fight, which we didn't think was possible previously.
It's just that sweep that we saw in that highlight that Tatanka did. He got 1 tag on all those squirrels. Pop, 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 pop.
Oh, it's so good, yeah. It's like the, if I go back to Brood War a lot because I love that game, the moment when Mutalisk Micro became a thing, and Mutalisks could clump up and they clumped them up with an Overlord or a trapped unit in the back or something, and all of the air units could just kind of go into one spot, and you could fly in with them, do some damage, and get back out with taking basically no damage. When that micro was developed, Mutalisks just became like one of the most powerful units in the game.
And they're still OP today.
yeah, Mutalisks are like one of the strongest units in the game to this day. So Snakes are kind of like that. If that's going to be a micro technique that unlocks their potential, then woof, indeed. All right, hearing nothing else from the chat at the moment, I think I'm gonna go ahead and put Cams up to A. It makes sense to put them along the others, and if they need to be dropped down later, then we'll keep an eye on the ladder and the meta. But that's what I'm gonna make as my choice here. Future candidates for next week and beyond, Wire definitely should be moving. Falcons could move, Skunks could move, but definitely Wire. And then we can keep an eye on Mines. They might become complete trash, or they might move up a little bit. Some of the other tier 3s might shift a tiny bit once we really settle stuff. But I think that's about it then. And that's all I've got for today. Any last words from either of you guys before I close down the episode?
Yeah. Well, just real quick, I think we're in a better position this patch than last patch. Looking at the tier list, anyways, I think pretty much most of the units are viable at this point. I know some people would like certain things like ferrets to be a little bit better, but I think we're getting closer and closer to ideal balance, at least in my mind, even if I'm not a fan of all the changes, But if you look at the spread, it looks pretty good.
I agree. I think we're in a better place right now. The game is incredible. I just need to give the biggest of shout outs to the developers. Like most if not all indie games with this fan base, with this player base, they would drop the support. Like, they wouldn't continue to develop and update the game like Eel is. It really just speaks volumes of the community and the leadership. So huge shout outs to Eel and Masta for putting in the work, and Andy as well for doing everything that they can to keep this game up and to keep it running and to keep it growing. So it's an amazing thing that we're actually here today. and this game is continuously being developed. So really happy about that. Really happy about the change. Ladder's a great place to be, and I'm having so much fun with the game.
Thanks for mentioning that, Kipo. I don't see any way that this game right now is really profitable for the devs. So it's awesome that they're still working on it and giving us great patches and updates and stuff, and we've got they are also keeping the Discord running with their Pocketbot Cup and stuff. So, you know, I would say if you guys in the chat have not, because I know we're all Tooth and Tail players and stuff, but if any of you have not checked out their other game, which I have not, but I want to at some point, I'll probably even put it on stream. That's one way you can support them is, you know, go buy their other game and play it, or you know, something
Monaco?
like that. Monaco, that's right. Monica or
Yeah.
Monaco? Monaco.
Monaco. It's an excellent
it's
game.
on
I have
Switch.
played it.
It's on Switch too. It's really good.
Yeah. So if you want to support the devs outside of, I guess, like some straight donate or something, go buy their other game. So, yeah, they're awesome. And that's going to do it. So thank you for being here, Kipo and Satoros. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks to see how things are going.